I'm lucky. I do exactly what I want to do when it comes to research. So I can pick my topics. I can choose what I want to do within reason and hope that I get it published. Right now I'm working with some friends on various different topics. One is about how people make decisions across different countries. I'm working on lean management with a professor from Turkey who's visiting us. And I'm working on the financial meltdown. And so what's a person who's an organizational scientist doing studying finance? It's very interesting. Most of the problems we've had since 2000 have nothing to do with money. They have nothing to do with accounting. They have everything to do with people's behaviors and organizations. They have to do with the cultures that we create in our organizations. They have to do with the trust that we break. And it has to do with how people decide to join organizations. So just to talk about a couple of these things, we talk about organizational culture a lot in my field because organizational culture is created by the people at the top. We like to think that we just walk into an organization and it is what it is. So we walk into there and people tell us, oh, this is how we do things here. This is all controlled, whether they like to admit it or not, by the people at the top of the organization. These cultures have become so dysfunctional that now those cultures are creating things like Enron, WorldCom, the financial meltdown. Because people are beginning to think that they can get away with whatever they want to get away with. The people at the top create a culture of values. And so I join an organization. If my values match the values of the organization, then I stay. If they clash, I go. And we are finding that cultures like Enron have a huge, huge turnover because people get in them and they think, oh, yeah, I can make a lot of money here. I can do this. I can do that. Hey, I'll get to do what I learned in school. And then all of a sudden they're in there and they either can't leave, like many of us can't leave our positions now because of the economy, or they leave anyway because the values clash so badly. I like to look at Enron because Enron could have been the most innovative, the most creative company ever. It was doing things with gas and oil and electricity, pretty boring commodities, that had never been done before. They were finding ways to get these products to their consumers in just absolutely marvelous ways and saving money and everything. And then all of a sudden the money got to people. So for some people there's never enough money, right? We know those. We all have a couple of friends or relatives like that. There's never enough. And these people for whom there is never enough were at the top of the organizations, and all of a sudden that's what the organization became. It became a greedy mess. And so people, the values changed in the organization, so people who still had these values started clashing with these values, and they had a huge turnover. And the people that stayed were the ones whose values matched. And that's basically Enron. Now, how does that work with the financial meltdown? The financial meltdown is very interesting because you get what you reward. We all know that if we've got kids, right? You get what you reward. Funny enough, people think that in business it's different. It's not. I always tell my students, don't ask how you get a raise, because they'll tell you something. They'll tell you anything. But what you do is you go in and you ask people who have gotten raises, what do they do to get them? And that's how you know what's rewarded. Unfortunately, with the financial meltdown in banks, they started rewarding how many loans you made, not the quality of those loans. I know many financial institutions where my students work, if you're a teller, you can't just be a teller anymore. You have to sell services. I mean, I thought the service at a bank was the banking. Apparently it's not. It's all these other things they sell. And you can get into that so much that if you're not careful about your reward system, you start rewarding things you don't want anymore. Well, with the loans, they started rewarding people for making loans. So I can make a loan to anybody for any amount of money. And I get paid based on the dollar amount of that loan, whether or not that person could afford the loan. And I've seen that with my students. My students have told me that they would go out looking for a house, and it didn't matter how much they made. They would always try to push them into a little more expensive house. And it wasn't the real estate agent doing it. It was the bank. And I had never heard of that before. I was shocked. I was absolutely appalled that the bank knew that they wanted to spend, what, a quarter of their income? A third of their income? Which is not unusual, on a house. And they were trying to push them up to 40% of their income for a house, knowing that the economy was at the time a little shaky, especially around here. What does that tell you about the values? What does it tell you about the values of that company? How would you fit in that company? I wouldn't fit very well. Another thing that we talk about a lot is trust. I was sitting in Ph.D. school a few years ago because I'm a late bloomer. Okay, I worked for 26 years before I went to Ph.D. school. And I'm sitting in class, and they just, the quarter had just ended because it was October of 2002, and right after that, Sarbanes-Oxley came in. And many of you know that Sarbanes-Oxley, one of the qualifications for Sarbanes-Oxley was that if you're CEO, you now had to sign that financial papers that you were submitting to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, were correct. If they aren't, you could face prison. So, end of the year came, they submitted their papers to SEC. Sarbanes-Oxley came out about the 15th, I think, of that October. And my professor came in one day and he said, well, here's the latest. 75% of publicly traded companies have asked for their statements back. And of course, I'm sitting there, and I don't like strategy. He was a strategy professor, and I didn't care too much for strategy. So I'm sitting there as an organizational behavior student, an organizational scientist, and I went, this could cause the collapse of society as we know it. Because our entire financial system is built on trust. All of it. Every bit of it. If I write a check, the trust is that that check is good. If I buy stock, I trust that that stock has not been overstated. If I invest in your company, I trust you're going to do what you say you're going to do. So think about this. 75% of publicly traded companies ask for their statements back. I was horrified. And so since then I've been working on functions and dysfunctions in organizations, and I'm particularly interested in trust. They've given me a semester off to just work on trust, and so I'm planning to do that. These sorts of things that organizational scientists know, unfortunately, we're not very good at getting that out to businesses. The idea of you get what you reward, that was written in 1975. The seminal paper on that was written in 1975. But yet, everywhere I've worked, they weren't always rewarding what they wanted. They were rewarding something else. And I've come to realize that we're not very good in academia about getting things out to what business are. So I'm really pleased that we have opportunities like the TEDx to do things like this, and I want to thank you for making this possible.